Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I am Reagan Kelly, and I am joined by two of my very cool and handsome co-hosts this week.
Nate Heininger.
And Shane Scratchy Voice.
Yes, and we're all Scratchy Voice here. It's that time of year. I think I'm never going to be well again. And this week we're talking about a game that I've been wanting to cover on this show since it came out early in the year, and something about the Game of the Year season gave us the kick in the pants that we needed to actually loop back and cover it, and so we're talking about Outer Wilds. And this is one of the most interesting games I played this year, and I'm super glad to be talking about it with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you picked up on it early. I'm really glad that we played this. Arguably not a short game. Let's go ahead and address that real fast.
We should probably put that right out there, because there's some things about this game, like theoretically, if you know exactly what you plan to do, you could beat the whole game in 20 minutes, but that's not how you're going to be playing this game.
How long did this take you guys, out of curiosity?
So I played the Epic Game Store version on Windows because that was the first version to come out. This game is out on PlayStation 4 now, but it wasn't when the game first came out early in the year, and so you had the choice at the time of Xbox One or the Epic Game Store exclusive Windows version. So I played on Windows, and I don't think that version of the game or the Epic Game Store includes a play clock. If I had to guess, I'd say this game took me somewhere between 15 and 20 hours, which obviously is way longer than what we usually cover on this show. Everything else about this game speaks to our kind of thing, so I really still wanted to cover this on the short game, even though it's not that short by most standards. Although it's not a really long game either. If you're comparing this with the other Outer W game of the year, the Outer Worlds, this is significantly shorter than that. But it's still longer than our typical fare.
I think when we say the game respects your time, I think this game absolutely does. It just takes longer to get through. I'm sitting somewhere around 12 hours, I believe. I have not finished the game, so we're going to be doing sort of a staggered spoiler break on this episode, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I will also say I am this is the opposite of the last episode, Bleak Sword. I am not great at exploration games. I am like the least observant person in a 3D world like this, so I think this type of game takes me even longer than it would like the two of you. So I'm not done with it because I've been spending so much time just like retracing my steps and trying to make sure that I've caught everything, because I tend to miss stuff.
For me, I was absolutely in a position to complete this game before I hit 15 hours. And I did run through and go through the ending at that point as soon as I was able to. So for me, I was able to get through it in relatively close to short game territory, but I enjoyed the game so much and I had so many questions at the end that I went back and really 100%ed this game as close to 100%ed as I usually will get with a game. And that took me in the neighborhood of another 5 hours. So, a little under 20 hours, I would think.
Yeah, but the game is incredibly generous with, we talk about respecting your time. This game is constantly rewarding you for your exploration. And so, I still feel like this is a game that extremely respects your player time. Let's talk about what kind of game it is. Now, Nate mentioned that we're going to do a sort of a tiered spoiler break approach to this. This is essentially a mystery game, right? It is a game about exploring a small solar system and solving several mysteries, specifically sort of what is your place in this world and who came before you and so on. We'll get into more details there in a minute. But the fact that it is such a mystery means that we want to be very careful about spoilers. There are some things in this game that are big surprises. In fact, there are some things that I found that, many major publications' reviews said in the first paragraph or two that I considered a spoiler of something about this game that was meant to be a surprise and isn't mentioned in the marketing materials, for example. So we're going to be pretty careful about this. We're going to start by talking about sort of just the general gameplay of how this thing works and what you're doing in Outer Wilds, which is a little hard to tell if you just look at a trailer. But we're going to be keeping the actual specifics of things that you discover pretty vague. Then we're going to do a spoiler break like we always do. After that spoiler break, we're going to continue talking about the game, but we're going to talk about some of those sort of early game spoilers that are things that that Nate will have already seen, that you'll probably have seen already if you've played almost any of the game, or at least for the first say 5 hours or so. And then we're going to have a sort of second tier spoiler break, and we're going to talk all sorts of details about the solutions and the mysterious stuff that we uncovered and the ending of the game. And that stuff I would absolutely not listen to if you haven't completed the game. So we'll be doing that sort of 2-tier approach here.
Yeah, I mean, that would basically it would render playing the game unnecessary. If you,
I don't know about that, because it's still such a wild thing to experience. But
that's a good point, and we'll talk about it. But this game is also beautiful and looks and sounds and feels great too. So you're right. There's worth beyond the mystery, but the driving force of this game is the mystery. Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I trying to accomplish?
So let's start with how this game begins. So this game begins on a planet called Timber Hearth. It looks very Earth-like, but of course, if you start looking around, you notice immediately the differences. So Timber Hearth is a rustic planet. It's covered in sort of pine trees and little brooks, and you're surrounded by other people of your same species. You're playing as a Hearthian, and the Hearthians are these blue aliens. They look very cute. They've got 4 eyes in a kind of a square configuration on the front of their head. They've got blue skin, pointy ears. They're real cute. And they live, the entire species presumably, in this one tiny little valley on this tiny little planet, Timber Hearth. And it's basically looks like a species whose entire world is a tiny summer camp. And yet they have a space program.
Yes, and it seems like their entire species at this point has moved towards space travel as the core of their civilization. There seems to be only 20 or so total, although there are some houses that are closed, so you can assume there's people in there as well. But pretty much anyone and everyone you talk to will either crack some sort of joke, because this game is funny also.
It is very
there's a lot of really funny jokes and a lot of really clever ideas in this game, or they're going to be talking about the space program. And you look around and there's a big tower. Everything is crafted with like wood and metal, like holding together the wood. It's very, like you said, summer camp. I think that's a great analogy. Everything is very much like built out of wood and sort of like high tech, but I don't know, almost like a Star Wars kind of thing, right? Like where everything is sort of like slapped together using whatever resources is around, but it also is spacefaring.
Yeah, and they're working with what they've got. This is a planet with maybe a couple hundred trees on it, and so everything's made out of wood and bound together with wire. And one of the things that you'll start seeing as you explore, you mentioned like this whole society is really focused around space travel, and I guess it kind of makes sense because they're on this planet that is so tiny. We're talking about kind of almost Super Mario Galaxy levels of tiny planetness. And
what I want to interrupt for a second. What I love about this is that the planets are large enough that each one can have a lot of stuff on it by video game standards, but absolutely not by planet standards. So when you're standing on this planet and any of the others that we'll be talking about later, it looks like you're just standing on a planet, right? But you get you go up a tall tower, and not even a particularly tall tower, like a 4-story tower, and you start seeing the curvature of Timberhearth. This is a planet that, like, if you get a fast enough running start and jump in just the right way, you can break orbit. Like, it's that tiny.
For better or
Yeah.
worse. You can also circumnavigate most of the planets. Timberhearth, I think it would probably take you about 8 minutes to run from one point, circle the entire planet, come back around, and be back where you were standing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting about Timberhearth is it has this very there, like you said, there's a lot going on the planet. But it also has sort of a strangely economical design to it. The vast majority of the surface of Timberhearth, even being as tiny as it is nothing but like essentially a smooth sphere covered in grass, occasionally broken up by like little groups of trees. Most of the interesting places are in these little valleys, like your home city, the only city of the Hearthians. And then there's a lot of other interesting little places. Do we want to talk about some of the interesting places on Timberhearth?
Well, yeah, before we get into that, because I do want to talk about like some of the interesting details about some of the planets. And in this sort of pre-spoiler section, we are going to talk only about things that you can see from space, basically. So we're not going to talk about anything that you have to explore by digging into any of the planets, including Timberhearth. And we're not going to talk about anything that's sort of like hidden in any way. We're going to talk exclusively about stuff that you can see while either floating above or walking on the surface of a planet.
And on that, I wanted to say too, like, so it also makes sense that this would be a spacefaring civilization, because just from the ground looking up, you can see almost every other planet in the solar system, and they are dominating in the sky. So you look up and you're like, there's another planet right there. We should go to there. It's right there, and you can see all of them. And in a single day, you're orbiting around a sun. There's a huge sun that you're a single day is what, like 6 minutes. So the sun sets, the sun comes up, the sun sets, the sun comes up. You can just look up into the sky and see this whole solar system of
literally so close you can touch it. The entire solar system is 33 kilometers across. That's how far.
And there's even some intriguing mystery right from the moment you open your eyes next to a campfire. You're looking straight up. The first thing you see in the game is this is one of the planets, the one called
Giant's Deep.
The Giant's Deep? It's your gas giant, and there's some kind of structure orbiting it that, as you're opening your eyes, breaks up, shoots out some kind of light, and then kind of separates into some pieces and starts orbiting around. So you're immediately like, oh, what was that? Maybe I'll go up there and find out.
Yeah. And it's your first day as an astronaut. So the first thing you have to do is explore your town on Timberhearth, because you need to take off, but you don't have basically the keys to your spaceship in order to do that. It's your first day as an astronaut.
Need the launch codes.
So you need to go around the town, talking to everybody, and climbing up to sort of the peak of the town in order to speak to somebody who has those launch codes in order to go back and launch the spaceship. And I really, really love this introduction. I love the way this introduces you to the world of the game, because you have to navigate the entire town in order to get to the guy with the launch codes, right? And that means you have an opportunity to talk to every NPC, basically every living Hearthian of your species, right? And at the top, and along the way, it sort of teaches you the history of your species. There is a little sort of museum near the base where they have all of the different stuff celebrating the history of Outer Wilds Ventures, the space agency, I guess, of the Hearthians, and talking about all of the brave people that went before you and flinging themselves off of this tiny planet and onto other tiny planets around your solar system. And then
their space agency literally started with people like taking running jumps.
It did.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
Yeah. It's awesome.
And then you get up to the top and they have a tiny museum featuring details about the solar system, all of which are really cool and evocative. So, I don't think it's spoilery to talk about anything that happens in that sort of like first 30 minutes on Timberhearth, we can talk about the contents of the museum, which is all sort of there as come-ons to tell you like what sort of things you ought to be exploring or looking for in your travels. And the big one is that there was another species in your solar system before you called the Nomai, and they left a bunch of interesting artifacts all around your solar system. They were clearly way more technologically advanced than the Hearthians. They, unlike the Hearthians, were like two-eyed, weird-looking goat people. There's a statue of one of them. And these fuzzy goat people had super advanced tech, and there's all sorts of weird stuff they left all over the solar system. And no one knows where they came from, where they went, why there aren't any more of them around now. And so that's one of the big central mysteries of this game, is exploring the solar system to try and find out what happened to the Nomai that came before you in the solar system.
Yeah, it kind of, I think they make some comparisons to like how we are with dinosaurs on Earth, where they're like, this new statue, it makes us think they had fur. Fur, can you believe it?
I love that.
We never thought they had fur until this statue. So it's very funny. Everyone is mystified by these creatures, and it really does set up early that like, okay, there's definitely something interesting and complex going on in this solar system. Also, I wanted to say along the way, they do some really clever ways to teach you the mechanics of the game before you really get into any sort of environment that might be more challenging. There is a zero gravity cave that they imply someone in there needs help or could use some help. You don't have to, but if you could, before you launch off, it would be cool if you went and helped. So it's like, of course I'm going to do that. It's a video game and they're giving me a little quest, right?
Totally.
So you go and you learn how to use the jetpack. You go into this zero gravity space and you have to make repairs on what they're calling a satellite down in this cave. And it teaches you some of the mechanics in a really controlled and easy space. You learn how to fly around. There's also a little area where someone is testing out a new little scout, which is controlled in a similar way to how the spaceship is controlled. You're just not in it. So it teaches you sort of how rocket thrusters work. And it's all very fun and very lightweight, which helps prepare you for whenever you do eventually go flying.
Yeah, I loved this sort of initial exploration of the planet, and you're right, it does a great job of tutorializing things. And apart from needing to go talk to somebody to get the launch codes for your spaceship, what I think is really interesting about this game is that it gives you all of the tools that you will need to explore the solar system immediately. It does not like dole out these devices and stuff as you go. And so let's talk about some of the different tools that you have at your disposal as a Hearthian astronaut.
Yeah, there are no, unlike I think almost every other game that has a spaceship and exploring, there's no upgrades. You're not changing your ship, adding like new rocket thrusters or whatever. You are in the same thing from right out of the gates. You get everything. I think the first biggest tool would be the signal scope.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. So they do this. This game is just full of such unique flavor. So all of the astronauts play a particular instrument.
Yes, before they all started going off to explore the solar system, they had a kind of a band and they would sit around a campfire and play music together. Isn't that charming?
Yeah, there's a big painting of them all together.
Yeah, it's adorable. And this signal scope, if pointed in the direction of someone playing that music, will pick it up and will basically, it's like a divining rod for these astronauts playing their instrument.
Yeah, I don't know if we really mentioned, but there are, you're one in a sort of a long line of these astronauts. Is long line for this species, where it seems like about half of the species are astronauts, and they are all out in the solar system on all the various different planets. Essentially, each planet has one of these guys on it for you to find, kind of to get the band back together in a sense.
Yeah, and so, there's a guy who plays the banjo, and you can stand on, you can, get up on a hill or something where you can just look into space, see a planet, point your signal scope at it, and you'll start hearing the music. And you could then theoretically just like go in that direction at the music, and you will find that guy playing it. It's a really unique and clever way to add some guidance in a game that is otherwise just go and explore.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about this with some of the other tools, but like every single one of the tools that it gives you is multi-purpose. So it finds other ways to use things like that signal scope later on that are really clever. And I really appreciated how versatile the tools were. The next big tool that you have to learn how to use, and I thought this one was a little more confusing at first, was the little scout.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, terrific tool.
Oh, I know, it's probably one of the smartest inclusions in the game, and I wonder how much like playtesting it took to kind of perfect this thing. Shane, do you want to explain it?
So the little scout is a you get this launching device that's like a slingshot / gun that fires off a probe, and it really is multifunction. If you fire off the probe, which you can just sort of point and click and shoot this thing off, and it'll go off in some direction. You can then hit a button, and then it will snap a little black and white photograph of what the probe is seeing and send it back to you. And if you really spam that button, you can kind of get close to like a video out of the probe. You can also get a rear view from the probe, or if the probe has landed, you can rotate its camera around and get a view of any direction.
Which is super great because like you can send this thing pretty far and get a view of some place that you might not be able to access yet, and that's a really good way to explore. And it's also faster than exploring on foot because you can launch this thing pretty fast.
It also acts as a light source, and there's a lot of times in the game where you'll want to just drop the probe to produce some light. You do have a light on your suit, but being able to kind of put a light anywhere you want is very useful. And you can recall the probe, teleporting it back into your launcher at any time. And there's this sort of recall teleport technology, which all these little kind of cool pieces of tech, it's very interestingly revealed somewhere in the world that like, okay, this is all stuff that we, the astronauts, have recovered from the Nomai's technology.
Yeah, pretty much everything is all the actual tech that you use is sort of it makes sense, right? Because these are basically like fish people living in a colony of about 100 dudes on a tiny planet. They, where did they develop all of this technology? Like these like space thrusters and stuff. Well, pretty much all of that is scavenged from the Nomai. And yeah, the little scout is super, super versatile. The other thing that I really, really like about it is that you can track the location of the probe. And so there are many times in this game where you might see something in the distance or whatever that you want to get to later, but you can't get to it from where you're standing. But by firing one of the probes at it, that sort of tags it as a location that you can try and navigate to more easily. You can kind of see where that probe is located, even if it's out of your range of vision or whatever.
Yeah. That's absolutely probably the most important feature I don't think I mentioned about the probe is that it has this homing beacon, and if you're wearing your spacesuit, you're always able to look around and see the location and distance of the probe, no matter where.
And we didn't, I don't think, mention that this game is all taking place in first person. So all of these tools are really great. Like you as first person in game or in world ways of letting you do things that if this game were more abstracted, say top down or third person perspective and had a bunch of like UI that you'd do with a menu, right? Like you could tag an object and say, track this object or something. But this game doesn't do that. It does have some elements like that, like your ship's computer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But making all of those features, like tagging an object, be an actual physical thing that you do in the world by firing a probe at it, that just made it so much more fun and immersive.
And have not just like a kind of realistic looking tech, but also a history in the world that gets explained. Like, how do these fish people have the ability to create a teleporting probe? Well, it turns out that they salvaged it from this ancient alien race called the Nomai, and here's where they did it, and here's who.
And I mean, if you go down enough of these rabbit holes, it eventually starts hand waving, right? But because this is not like hard sci-fi. This is still cute, fun, funny, and what have you. But it takes its setting seriously enough to try to give you something to hang these things on.
Any question that you decide to pursue, there's probably an answer in this game, and that is one of the things I love about it. If you're like, well, I want to learn about the history of the Harthians, there's a lot you could find there. If you want to learn about the Nomai or about this space program or about all the many things that you'll find out in the solar system that we haven't discussed yet and won't till after the spoiler break. You can really dig down and find information and learn, and it's all very satisfying.
Yeah, I think the last tool, at least you have with you at all times, is your spacesuit itself.
Yes.
Is I think would be a tool. So one, it
Don't forget
allows
to
you
put
to
it on.
breathe. You have to put it on. It's in your ship.
So many times I forgot to put it on.
You have to put it on. Don't forget to put it on. You have to put on your suit, and then it has an oxygen tank, which depletes relatively slowly when you're in a non-oxygenated environment, and it also has a jetpack, and that
Sweet.
gives you a ton of freedom for exploring, because also gravity is different on different planets, and sometimes you can just jump really high, but sometimes you need a little bit of a boost, or you see something that you want to get to and you can get a little bit of a boost. And it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, you're extremely mobile in this game, not just in terms of like, I can hop in my spaceship and get to another planet within a minute, but also in the sense that like you can do these massive jumps, or you can use your rockets to propel yourself along causeways faster and things like that. Like there's lots of ways that this game makes you able to become very mobile, and that helps with the exploring. Your exploring never feels bogged down because you're always able to just like, jump into your spaceship and take off and be across the solar system in a minute or two.
Yeah, for me, that reminded me of No Man's Sky a lot. The flying and just the ability to jump in your spaceship and take off and land on another planet. I mean, it's not quite analogous to No Man's Sky, but it really feels similar in a lot of ways, and I really like that style of gameplay. I love exploration, and I love space exploration in particular as gameplay.
Yeah, that wow moment of No Man's Sky, being on the surface of a planet, looking into the sky, seeing another planet, being able to get in your ship and fly directly to that planet and land on the surface of that planet with no loading or anything, which felt so awesome in No Man's Sky, is the same here, just on a lot smaller scale. You don't fly as far as you do in No Man's Sky. These planets are not that far away from each other. It takes like a second. Before we jump to the next topic, I just want to add one little detail that I actually really loved when talking about jumping. If you're not in your spacesuit and you want to jump, when you hit X, at least on a PS4 controller, your character crouches down, and then when you let go of X is when you jump. And I just feel like you never really feel that in first-person games, that your character actually has to like bend down to jump. Actually like bend their knees. You're normally just like, you're just flat, and then you just jump. In this game, it's just really evocative to imagine these weird little, as you call them, like fish creatures. They have to like actually bend almost halfway down to jump, and you really only jump without your spacesuit like a couple feet in the air. And I just love that little detail.
Yeah, there's so much. So we were just talking about like the jump in the spaceship and go kind of stuff. I want to talk about some of the specifics about the spaceship itself, because I think it's so charming and it's so fun to fly. And there's so many cool things in it, like the computer are like just absolutely revolutionary. So I want to talk a little bit about everything about the spaceship and how cool it is. And again, I think we're not in spoiler territory here, because again, this is stuff that you will experience within easily the first 20 or 30 minutes of the game. But the spaceship is this incredibly, you know what it reminded me of is, did you ever see, like, there was a movie, I think it was from the like late 80s or early 90s. I think it was called The Explorers. And it was like a crappy Disney live action movie about a bunch of kids who build a spaceship powered by like, I don't know, like an Apple II, and they like take off in it or something.
No, but
excuse me, that movie is not crappy.
Okay. That sounds exactly like what you do in this video game, though.
It's very much like that. Your spaceship is basically, it looks a little bit like a real lunar lander. It's kind of a like a pod with sort of a superstructure of little strut-like leg supports, and then it's got jets that can point off of it in any direction. And in terms of flying it, the flying is probably the thing that a lot of people seem to have the most hard time with in this game. And I found getting used to being able to fly the spaceship one of the most fun things about this game. Um, the spaceship has, you basically just like, you have like a thrust button that causes your spaceship to go, right? But it can fire its thrusters in any directions, in any direction. So once you're out of an atmosphere and not being not subject to gravity, your spaceship can move in any direction and rotate in any direction in a way that feels very almost FPS. Like, it's kind of strange, but like I realized when I was first took off, I was like, oh, I can like circle strafe around planets in this spaceship. Like, it's very strange controls, but they're really fun and rewarding to use.
Yeah, this is where the game also started to feel to me a little Kerbal Space Programming.
Yeah.
Which I think is a compliment because I love that game. But there are times where you are just like, I don't know, as you're getting better at the ship, I felt like there were times that I was losing complete control, and it was more just like panic controlling to try to not crash, and sort of missing where I was trying to land by a mile, and that ends up flinging me back into space and into the orbit of another planet because they're all so close. There's a really wacky element of it, as well as I never really got good at landing. And so I have the same strategy of landing on this game, which is how I accomplished my first lunar landing in Kerbal, which is basically get as close as you can and then just get out of the ship and kind of like jetpack down and hope that my ship lands intact around me. In Kerbal, my first ever moon landing, the ship didn't survive, but my Kerbal survived. And that was quite an accomplishment. And that's how I kind of managed this entire game too, was get close, bail, and try to land. And for the most part, I was pretty successful.
So the ship has an autopilot that I think is very good at teaching you how to fly the ship, because it does some things. The autopilot is very dumb. For example, if you tell it to fly you to a planet and there is a sun in the way, it will fly you into the sun. No problem. It's really just sort of a straight line autopilot. But what the autopilot does do is it sort of shows you how to manage speed and thrust in this game. So in a very space-like way, when you're flying from place to place, step one is to sort of equalize your momentum with the thing that you're flying towards, right? So it will like try and look at how fast what direction the other planet that you're trying to go to is moving, and it will try to match speed and velocity with that other planet. And then it will accelerate you towards the other planet, and then about halfway through that flight, it will start braking, because you don't want to accelerate the whole way there, or when you get to the planet you're going to, you will be going very, very, very fast. And that process, either doing it manually or using the autopilot, was always kind of fun. And it was also always a very short flight. Like I said, 33 kilometers across this whole space solar system. So really fast, little short flights, super fun to do. And the landing is also really neat. Nate, were you using the landing camera?
I tried using the landing camera, and I don't know. I never really mastered it. Like, I think it's possible to master. I'm assuming
it is. I got pretty good with the landing camera. Like, if you do need to land the ship, the tricky thing about the ship in its regular mode is that your cockpit, which is made out of glass, is the front of the ship, and if you say like go forward, you are going to crash your face into the planet. But if you switch to the landing camera, it switches the thrust controls so that they basically are towards the planet or away from the planet, no matter what orientation your ship is in. And it will sort of automatically orient your ship with the bottom where the landing camera is pointing towards the planet. So that makes it pretty easy.
Important thing here is, like, there's this button. There's a couple of buttons that are part of both spaceflight and using your suit. One is you can click, and I'm played on the PS4, but you can click your stick to highlight any kind of body in the solar system, whether large or small, but say it's a planet, and it will highlight it and tell you how far it is and so on. And then there's another button that equalizes your momentum with it. So if you're floating out in space, like maybe next to something that you're inspecting, hitting this button will bring you essentially to a stop, although everything in the solar system is in constant motion. It'll bring you to a stop related to the thing you've highlighted. And that makes, once you get used to that, that makes like landing on planets easier, but it also makes like everything you do in 0G easier because you're not constantly fighting your own velocity. You can always hit this button and slow down to a stop.
Yeah, you make it sound really easy, Shane, when you put it that way. You just press this button. But when you're out there, and you're going at 100 kilometers a second, it's usually easier just to unbuckle and jump out the hatch than actually try to land the ship.
You and I have different approaches, Nate, but I respect it. I respect it.
Hey, I said at the top of the show, I'm not great at these games, but you know what? I have a good time, and that's what's most important.
And it really does support that sort of wild, goofy play with this, too. It's really kind of designed around that approach, too. And I definitely played that way a lot until I figured out how to use everything.
Well, I'm at like 12 hours, so you were at 20, so I've got another 8 hours to maybe get to the level that you were at.
You'll get it.
And these kind of simulationist elements are something that I absolutely loved about this game. This game, fundamentally, this is a game about exploration, and we play a lot of games like that on this show. And a lot of the ones that we play kind of fall into this sort of walking simulator kind of exploration where you are walking around and exploring a space on foot. But it's the story that you're interested in, right? And that's also true here. But here, the actual mechanics of exploring and some of the kind of puzzles that are related to that, and really just a lot of the pure movement has a level of mechanical interest and complexity to it that isn't present in a lot of the kinds of games that we play here. This has that kind of environmental storytelling element that we wind up talking about a lot because it's in a lot of the kinds of games we enjoy. So you're absolutely going to be finding a lot of skeletons. I didn't find any of them on the toilet, but you'll find them doing almost anything else. That's a little in joke. But so that exploration usually comes as a reward for some kind of challenging kind of movement problem or traversal problem. And whether that's just like landing on or what?
Or just timing problems.
Or resource management, you've got your oxygen and things like that. So there's a lot of systems that are coming together to give you this exploration experience. And fighting with those or exploiting those. Oh, and not to mention things like, your probe and your signal scope and things like that. All of those different, this is a systems heavy exploration game that isn't, and I have played systems heavy exploration games, but every systems heavy exploration game I've ever played was a survival game. And this is not. So, in fact, quite the opposite. It's
easy to die.
It's a game where you will die
later.
frequently.
Well, yeah.
So, Shanna, I definitely think you're right about all of that. What I think is sort of interesting about this game is that I can think of two games that, for me, sort of redefined what exploration means in a video game. And there's this one and Breath of the Wild. Like, both of those changed what exploring a space means in such a way. Like, this is, and they're two very different ways, but like, you're right, Shane, this is a game about like rewarding exploration, but that doesn't just mean like I'm going to walk around each of these spaces and pick up a bunch of objects and read some text about them or whatever. It means that every one of these places is full of complexity. Yes, they're puzzles, but they don't feel like here's a puzzle to solve. Or, you're not like finding a puzzle room. It's all about just sort of, the puzzle is figuring out how these planets work and figuring out just details about how things are connected and spaces and things. And exploring spaces is always rewarded by finding some new detail about the past or solution to the mysteries of the solar system.
Yeah, I'd also add that I think one of the ways this game is most successful too is that I think most of the games that we have talked about as far as exploration, and Breath of the Wild does the same as this, is that you're really just following a path that has been pretty obscured by the developers, but they give you hints along the way on how to follow it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's ultimately like an ideal route. You might not do exactly what the developers asked you wanted you to do, but you're probably going to have a relatively same experience as almost everyone who plays the game. This game, however, gives no pressure to go in any one direction than any other.
Yeah, there are, what is it? How many planets are there?
6 or 7.
Yeah, and there's no like person back at home base saying, "Hey, maybe the first place you should land should be X or Y," right? There's no pressure to go in any particular to go towards any particular planet. And there's nothing stopping you from more or less fully exploring the mysteries of any one planet when you get there. It's very nonlinear in that way.
Yeah, there will be people who will discuss planets, but even at the beginning, they're like, "Hey, we think this person's out at this planet, so you could go, you might go talk to them while you're out on your journey." And then they're like, "Oh, and there's also this one planet that no one's ever even been to, so maybe you'll be the first to go to it." And they just drop hints about like the style of these different planets, but there is no pressure or no guidance really. Like even if you wanted to know like what's the first one I should go to, there is no answer to that because it doesn't really matter what order you go in.
I think it's worth mentioning here, we haven't really talked about the ship's computer.
Oh,
because we're talking a lot about like the fact that the game has no waypointing or any quest giver telling you what to do. But what the game does have is a really excellent computer that you can get on in your ship that will list everything you know about everywhere you've been. And it gives you that information in a couple of different ways. The most useful is as a kind of grid of different places that you can kind of select to see all the details. And they're all connected by kind of logic lines, right? Things that you might know about. And so there's oftentimes lots of places that you will know exist because you have read something on a wall somewhere. And that will now show up in your now show up in your system's computer. And so you can easily jump back in where you left off in terms of following up on plot threads or on like various different things that you've learned. So that's incredibly important about how this game works. And my advice to anyone playing this game is check the computer almost every time you get in and out of the ship.
Yeah, this is like one of the most incredible pieces of UI I've seen in a video game in years. The feature is called the rumor mode. Rumor mode on your ship's computer. It resembles a sort of like a high tech, like a mind map, or maybe a high tech version of one of those crazy people conspiracy theory walls where they've got the string, between all of the different elements. Except it puts up those cards and draws those strings in for you, because as you discover things in the world, it fills things in, and every sort of idea, place, concept gets a card on that wall, and each one of them, it will kind of give you bullet points of what you should remember about that thing, and it will also show something that says maybe there's more to discover here, indicating like we need to go back and continue exploring that space. Or it might, when it first shows up, it has a question mark. Once you've discovered everything there is to know, or the game thinks you have discovered everything there is to know about that space and filled in all of its little bullet pointy important fact details about it, it changes from a question mark to just a picture of that space, which makes it easy to remember. Oh, that's what that was. I remember that picture. So I took a long gap in playing this game, which I don't recommend. I would play through all of it all at once if you can, but for a variety of reasons related to just living my life, I played most of this game months and months ago, back when it first came out, and then I stopped playing it for a good while, and then I picked it up and finished it only here recently. But being able to go back to that rumor mode and look at sort of a mind map of everything that I had discovered up to that point was so important to being able to jump back in, even just between one game session in another. But even coming back to it months later, I was able to like look at that and be like, oh, okay, I remember kind of what I was wondering about. What were the questions that I, the player, had? What are the questions that are on the board here? And it reminded me, okay, well, the places I probably need to go and spend some more time exploring are this, this, and this. Let me pick one of those and start exploring again. So good. One of the best pieces of UI I've seen in a video game. Just really, really, really good.
Yeah, this game would be impossible without at least something like this, and I think they kind of nailed it.
Yeah, they really did. There's so much like complex interconnected stuff, you know? Like there might be a detail that you learn on one planet that means that you can unlock something or explore a space that you weren't able to explore before on a different planet. And it'll always put both of those on the map for you, on the mind map, and draw a little line between them to remind you of the connection. It's so important. So here we are, we've done our best to kind of sell you on the game and tell you a little bit about how it works and why it is an absolutely astonishing piece of exploration-based game design. And we've managed...
Why we're making an exception for it and covering a game that probably is too long for this.
Yeah. And yet we've managed, I think, to keep the spoiler content extremely low. All we've really talked about is the home planet that you start on, and not even all the deep details of that. And we've only really talked about like one or two of the other planets only by name. So we are going to now lead into a spoiler break. The first of two spoiler breaks in this episode, like I mentioned at the top. So Nate's going to stick around for this one, and we're going to talk about some of the details of the game that we considered things that you might want to discover for yourself. So if you haven't played the game at all, or if maybe you need a little more detail about it before you decide whether you want to spend your time on it, stick around after this first spoiler break. We're going to have a second spoiler break a little later where I think Nate is going to jump off the call and Shane and I are going to talk about the ending and some of the solutions to some of the mysteries and other sort of spoiler cast
If you're jumping off right now, I think it's also important that you hear that this game had one of my favorite endings of any video game I've ever played.
Oh, it's a really, really good ending. Yeah, like no question. Great ending. And it seemed like, honestly, when I first started this game, I thought like, does this game even have an ending? It just seems like this aimless exploration where I'm just going to like check out all these places in the solar system. How does a game like this end? Well, the fact is that this game has a kind of a culmination that leads to a, I thought, really exciting, interesting, moving ending that absolutely one of the best and easily one of the best video game endings I've seen this year. And probably makes a list for best video game endings I've played. I thought it was a really good ending. So having said all of that, here it is, your first spoiler break.
So I went into this game like I do for every game that we cover for this show, completely blind. I try not to read anything. I just try to like play the game as a, I like to think as like the developers intended, right? I had no idea what I was getting into when I purchased this game. Did all the stuff that we just talked about, exploring the home planet, finally getting the launch codes, finally getting my ship up into space. It was beautiful. I'm like, okay, where am I going to go for the first time? I decided to go to Giant's Deep for the first time. I'm firing the rockets. I didn't want to use autopilot because I can fly this ship. That'll be I'm gonna need to learn how to fly this ship. So I'm not gonna start out with autopilot. And I promptly flew myself into the sun. And I and it like the screen. It's like pretty terrifying, right? And the sound is getting louder, it's getting brighter, and then it just boom, and you're dead. And I'm like, shit. I did not know. I guess I could have assumed, but I did not expect like death to necessarily be a part of this game in this way. And so I was like, oh shit, I died. Oh crap. Well, I hope I don't have to do all that again. I hope that maybe I'll be like, it'll start me out before I started my descent. I don't know. I was just thinking like, where was the last save state, right? Where am I going to pick back up? And then it goes to this little cut scene where I see like a quick cut of all of the things that I had just done. and you wake back up in the moment that you started the game. And I was like, oh, okay, this is totally something different than I was expecting. And you look down in the bottom left hand and you can see that you've already acquired the launch codes. So you have retained the knowledge that you had. It's a really clever way of indicating that you've retained what you learned in your last playthrough, but you are back at the moment that you started the game.
Yeah, and you can go talk to that first
Groundhog
Harthian
Day.
who it is Groundhog Day, and you can go talk to that first Harthian who's sitting at the campfire with you, and you can tell him something like, "I just died." And he's like, "What are you talking about? You're crazy."
There's and like every once in a while, new things will get added to what you can say to the guy based off of like things that have happened to you. So like you mentioned before the spoiler break, it says autopilot flew me into the sun is something that you can say to him if autopilot has flown you into the sun. So I just, that was such an astounding moment. I did not expect that at all, for it to be like a gameplay element that you're dying.
I'm really glad that you got that surprise. I did not, because so many of the reviews of this game that came out, even when it was very new, specifically mention this. They say, "Oh, this game is, Super Mario Galaxy meets Groundhog Day," or some facile comparison.
Meets
like
Kerbal
that.
Space Program.
And even the Wikipedia article on this game mentions the 22-minute loop that you are stuck in this game in the first sentence of the article.
I didn't hit that 22-minute mark for many of my first deaths because it's so easy to die in lots of different ways. Yeah. In fact, the first time I died in this game, I actually hadn't gotten into the ship yet. I think I wandered into some of that unstable ghost matter.
Yeah.
And just died that way. And if you die without having gotten to the statue and had the thing where the statue like syncs up with your memories, it just rolls credits right there. It gives you the full-on like ending. It's like, oh,
that's awesome. I love that.
And there's actually several ways in the game that we won't talk about I won't get into this till we get into some of the puzzles, but there's several ways in this game that you can die in a way that that
you don't
tech
loop.
That is looping your memories won't save you. And if you get hit any of those, like it's like, oh, roll credits.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep. And then you've got to choose a load last save option rather than continue adventure option.
That's funny. I didn't run into any of that. I've only died, I guess, in natural ways. Though I definitely died to some ghost matter on Giants Deep.
Yeah.
And I haven't gone back to explore that area yet. But
the ghost matter is a really interesting mystery.
Yeah, I did at one point disable the device that was storing my memories, and then died while trying to do something, and it was like, oh yeah, now you're really dead.
Yep.
Nice work.
Yep, nice work. I did that too, I'm afraid. That was very... that's a challenging moment. That's a spoiler too that we won't get into. So there's the 22-minute loop is a really clever part of this game because I think it really encourages that exploration because that you don't have to carefully manage your fuel or whatever. Going on a kamikaze run, if there's something to learn at the end of it, is a absolute win, right? You can go deep into the planet or, into the place that seems like you'll never be able to return from it alive, or you can wreck your ship on a planet and go check something out.
Or you can dive out of your ship instead of landing it perfectly because I'm not going to make it back to my ship anyway.
Right, yeah. So I loved that about it, this resetting loop. And it's also such an interesting part of the mystery of the game. Like, just telling me like you're exploring a solar system in order to find out who came before you. That's cool, but it's also not urgent. Why am I dying every half an hour? That's an urgent mystery to explore and is so cool to think about.
Well, and also, so the 22-minute loop is because the sun supernovas at 22 minutes and destroys the entire galaxy. Or
entire solar system.
So thank you. Sorry. You also in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, can I stop this somehow?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's really gotta be the core. That's really gotta be the big thing.
Yeah, like
right?
how do you save your planet and the other people
Yeah.
on it from this sun-going supernova? That's another
Because
like important mystery of the
well,
game.
it's the most important. It doesn't matter if you figure out who the Nomai are. If 18 minutes after you figure out who they are, the whole galaxy, damn it, the whole solar system is going to be destroyed. So I know I'm not at the end of the game yet, but like, and you don't interact with that the sun exploding too much, other than just being murdered by it over and over and over. It's got to be a core part of it. You gotta get past it somehow.
Yeah, it's really, really, it's such a cool gameplay idea. And I mean, they did a good job of like not putting that front and center in the advertising. I guess kind of knowing that like that will get talked about.
It's your first big wow.
It is your first big wow, though. And it sounds like Nate had a big wow of that. So I'm glad that you did, Nate. I had heard about that already. And even though I knew it, it was still super creepy and cool, right? I think for me, my first flight was I got on the spaceship after doing all the exploration. I flew to the moon, which is obviously there's a small moon that orbits Timberhearth, and I flew there because I thought, well, where should I explore first? Obviously, one small step, right? And I met up with the one guy who's hanging out there on the moon.
He's whistling.
Yeah. And the moon is nicely set up to be a good place to go first because there's he suggests that you go up to this sort of hill that he has up on the moon, which is a good place to use the signal scope from, and you can use it to kind of like find a lot of the different places that your other dudes are using the signal scope, and kind of like leads you towards wanting to explore more. And then right as I was standing in that spot using the signal scope to kind of like scope out the universe, I was like, is the sun getting redder? What's going on with that?
Yeah. It starts changing color, and then the soundtrack changes to give this little sort of mournful tone. And I got to the point where I was like, that bit of soundtrack change would always really stress me out if I had anything left I wanted to get done.
Yeah.
Because it'd be like, oh no, I've got like a minute. I got like a minute before the sun explodes. Okay, read quick.
Yeah, you don't have a wristwatch on your stupid spacesuit. Like, I really wish I had like a timer or something. You only really get to know like what's going on if you. And
another thing, since we're talking about this loop, something that's really key to the game is that this is a set of worlds that are all changing over time.
Yes, also
in
super
some way.
important.
We were going to talk about these planets and what you could see from space. Some of them are changing in extremely dramatic ways. Like, for example, there's a set of planets that's a pair of planets that are orbiting one another called the Ash Twin and the Ember Twin. And at the start of the loop, there's a bunch of sand, or I guess ash, on this planet called the Ash Twin. And then as they orbit each other, gravity starts to pull the sand or ash from that planet onto the other planet. And so that over time, that exposes some things on one planet and buries some things on another. And as you go through these loops, there are places that you're going to only be accessible at the start of the loop or the end of the loop. And there's also, because all these planets are in motion and in orbit of one another, there are things where maybe the positioning of the planet matters. Or, if you're riding a comet, like where is that comet going to go? Like there's a comet you can ride that happens to take a real close shot past the sun that can kill you, and some other stuff like that. So that's a huge key piece of the game, and it's really unique. And like working around that and learning not just these environments but how they change over the course of this 22-minute loop is really neat.
It really, really is. And there's so many places in the game where like okay, I'm going to give you a small example that I'm going to try to obfuscate as best I can. But like, okay, and I'm going to come up with some sort of fake details to fill in here to kind of give you a sense without trying to spoil a puzzle. But like, okay, so there's a door that I want to get through, right? And there is let's say that there's water around us, right? And if the room is fully submerged, I can't go through it in order to get through where I need to go. But if the room is entirely empty, then I can't reach what I need to reach. Well, maybe I need to wait for just the right moment for that water to be at the right level in order for me to get through a particular passageway. That's not an actual example from the game. That is one that I'm inventing as a kind of a fake out to kind of give you an idea of the kind of thing that we'd be talking about here. So maybe I need to go to that planet, get in position, wait for that water to rise, and take that specific moment before it rises all the way, but after it's risen enough to get through that door, or to unlock something or what have you. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. There's a lot of places in the game like that, and one of the best things that Shane said to me while I was stuck on a particular puzzle was just like, every time you're stuck in this game, think about like, is there something about this particular spot that changes over time? And if there is, try to think about where you can be at the, if there's a way to be in that space at the right time over the course of that 22-minute loop in order to take advantage of that change.
Yeah, there are some
sometimes your best next step is to fly into the sun and start over and get there at the right moment.
There are times like on giant steep with the storm where it becomes almost like incomprehensible what's happening to you when a storm gets over top of you. But I was like, this must mean something. There must have to use these to some degree. I don't know.
Yep.
There's obviously some things that I have to figure out still. But yeah, it's a really interesting and really cool mechanic. And it just takes time and effort to visit all of these places at different times and almost like catalog what happens. And it's all to solve stuff that you're slowly putting together anyway. Like I'm rarely, at least to my experience so far, it's rarely have I been like, I'm going to go to this area to try to learn this one thing. It's more like, I'm going to go to this area because I haven't been here. I'm going to see what I learn and how that ties into what I already know.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, something guides me to an area. The Nomai have a whole thing going on where they're talking about the other planet. So you might go to the other planet because you know something from the Nomai is there, but you don't really know what it is. So I'm just walking around looking for Nomai-like things.
Let's talk about the Nomai and their story. Like, one of the things that I really liked about this game is the sort of non-linear way that it tells the story of the Nomai people. And I don't want to spoil anything. We're going to talk about the specifics of that in our sort of extra spoiler break. But like, I really liked how there are characters there. Some of the Nomai are characters with names that you learn about their stories and their relationships with each other. And, you learn about like what they were working on and like what they were trying to achieve when, in your tiny solar system.
And part of that is from their writing system, which is really interesting. There's no document in this game that has a single author. Every piece of writing is like a curly Q that could have multiple branches coming off of it. And one of the pieces of equipment that you have that no previous astronaut has had is a translator. So you're unable to unlock all the secrets of the Nomai in ways that no previous astronaut was. You're able to read their writing and see them essentially replying in multi-threaded email threads to each other in these bits of writing that like will appear on their walls and things like that. And that's how you learn most of what you learn in the game, I would say.
Yeah. Nate, because you haven't finished the game, maybe you're in a better spot to talk about what you discovered about the Nomai that, like, I don't want to just like say like, oh, here's, everything I know about the Nomai. What did you think about their story and like, where are you at with it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I will say that I'm still having a hard time completely articulating what I believe is going on with the Nomai.
That's fine.
But they are... The biggest question that I still have is like, why are they gone? Because so much of their stuff is still here, right? And there still seems to be a lot of like functioning technology or recently functioning technology. So the thing that stands out to me is it seems like, yes, they're all gone, but it wasn't that long ago that they were here. So the timber hearth people treat it as like an ancient civilization, and I'm starting to think like, no, they're either still here somewhere or they are very recently deceased from this solar system. So that's one thing. It's definitely a scientific people that are very much about the exploration of the different planets and messing around with the elements on each planet. I guess that's all I have. It's kind of hard to
Have you learned
articulate
anything
it.
yet about like why they came to the solar system or why they were still there, anything like that?
I don't
I think that's
so.
the sort
I
of
can't
thing
think
that
of.
Shane and I should probably talk about in our post spoiler
Yeah, I think it's still on the
section.
I might have, but it's hard for me to.
I know it's still
this
so
whole
very
game.
piecemeal.
It's so many floating pieces.
Yeah.
You know, I might have that, but I'd have to like go back and look at the rumor thing and try to and piece it together.
It's
but
complicated.
No, I don't
there
have
were
any.
a lot of things that I didn't really piece together until like the last, say, like, well, couple of hours of the game when things really started to kind of come together and make.
Yeah, I think I'm at this like weird, almost like 65% into the game sort of thing where I've got a lot of the puzzle pieces. I just haven't clicked them all together. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like I've got the for the puzzle, I've got the frame built and I'm just still starting to put all the pieces in it together. Because I've been to every planet, I've learned a whole lot of things from every planet, but there's still something that I'm missing that like ties it all together.
Yeah, you will need to go to each planet usually several times, some of them more than others, in order to kind of unlock all of their secrets. And very often you'll learn something on one planet that sort of clues you in on something on another planet and makes it worth visiting again to explore something that you didn't get to see before. Do we want to talk about anything specific that we saw on any of the planets? Anything that we thought was cool that we think is a spoiler, but maybe not like a true end game spoiler we could talk about?
Well, I'll tell you one discovery that I had that I thought was pretty cool is again on Giant's Deep, where there's these storms that if you get caught in it, you just get flung into the sky, and you either hope you either land in the water or you can sort of jetpack yourself carefully down. Otherwise, you will just plummet to the earth and fall, or plummet to the ground and die. And there's a island that you can go to. There's a number of islands, but on one of the islands there's a platform that it looks like a tornado. It's like a blue glowing tornado on this little platform. It's a circle. It's glowing blue. I was like, well, that's really interesting. And I thought, I wonder if that has if I'm standing on it when a storm comes by, will it do something? Because it looks like a storm. So inevitably one will come on, it will hit where you're standing, will hit the island. So I stood on the little blue platform, storm came, suddenly the whole thing lights up and you're in like a blue tube and you are unaffected by the storm. It passes right over you and you can just stand on that platform and then the storm goes by and you can remain safely on the planet. I just thought that was like really, really cool. You could probably, I'm assuming there's an actual use for it for moving the story forward, but just like that discovery of like I bet this will do something, and then it does, it protects you, and then you could be like, well, that would make sense if the Nomai were here, they would want technology to protect themselves when this storm comes over. So they built it so they could stay on the planet more safely. I just thought that was like a really cool little mystery. What is this thing? Oh, it protects you. That's great. Oh, it has like a logical reason to be there. That's cool too. It's done.
I really every planet has something really cool about it, but one of the like most wild discoveries I made in the very early game was Brittle Hollow. Is exactly what it sounds like. It's a planet that is brittle and is hollow, and at the center of this planet is a black hole, and it's a tiny black hole. But like the game does a really good job of making that black hole look weird, right? Every time you look at it, you get that sort of like light is sliding off of it kind of look that makes it just like incredibly difficult to look at. It's like a black dot, but all the light around it is bending in odd ways. And it's got incredible gravity, which means that if you are trying to navigate around inside of Brittle Hollow, which is basically a shell around the black hole with sort of stuff hanging down the inside edge of this shell, it's very, very difficult to navigate in there without falling through the hole. So, of course, the very first thing I did was fall through the hole and pop, you come out of a white hole, which is on the other end of the solar system. And a realization that I had, I think I needed to be clued in by Shane about one part of this was that that's really interesting because Brittle Hollow is falling apart over the course of the game, and that means that some of the parts of that planet that are these like structures that you clearly want to get to, but that are partly inaccessible. One of the easiest ways to get to them is to just wait for them to fall through the black hole and fly up to them in the white hole. So this thing that was part of a planet is now, and had gravity, is now just hanging in space on the other side of the solar system after it falls through the black hole. And that was such a like brain explosion moment. I was like, oh man, that thing that I couldn't get to before, now I can just fly up to it.
Yeah.
I loved that. There's all sorts of little like cool moments like that in this game.
Yeah.
Like,
there was also with Dark Bramble, the weird like looping element of Dark Bramble.
Sure.
And like I fell into Dark Bramble enough times that I came back out the other side, I guess. But I was just in my jetpack. So I was just, well, great. I'm just out. Now I'm just out in space. Dark Bramble has floated away from me. And I'm just going to run out of oxygen and die and try to do that all again, but not fall into that hole.
Yep.
Also, just real quick too, on that note, another tiny detail that I loved and also was terrified by is that, did you notice that if you die by running out of oxygen, when you wake up on your next run, you gasp for breath a lot more than you do on a normal death?
I didn't notice that. That's funny.
Yeah. You wake up normally and you're just like, huh. But when you wake up after having died by not being able to breathe anymore, you're like, you know, it's really
that's awesome.
It's a great detail.
So I guess that's all we can really talk about without getting into like true like puzzle solutions and late game content and story spoilers and so on that I really do want to talk about with you, Shane, but I know Nate, you haven't finished and you want to dive back in and find this stuff out for yourself. So probably a good time for us to call that second spoiler break. Before we do, listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net or on Twitter @_shortgame or on Patreon. Please support the show if you like it. And every one of our patrons gets an invite to our Discord where we talk about all the details. If you are stuck in this game and you want somebody to give you gentle but useful hints, Shane is very good at that. He helped me with a couple of things, or I'd be happy to do my best as well. And if you're on our Discord, we'll have that conversation going for a while. So you can join us there if you go to patreon.com/theshortgame and support us at any level. Every little bit helps, and we appreciate every one of you who joins us there. And of course, we enjoy talking to you guys on the Discord as well. If you want to find me on the internet, you can also find me at Reagan K. That's RAYGANK. Nate, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at NateSTL.
And Shane, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And here is your second spoiler break for this episode. All right, and Nate has taken out his headphones, so we are good. Shane, in this post spoiler section, listeners, if you're sticking with us, then that either means you have absolutely no interest in playing the game. What is wrong with you? Or you've already played it, and so we're all in good company here, and we're going to be talking about the deep spoilers and comparing notes on what we discovered. Do we want to talk first about the Nomai? Do we want to talk first about the ending, or where do you want to go first?
Let's start just by talking about coolest planets once you land.
Oh, dude.
So, I mean, the one that took me the longest to figure out, but that was ultimately coolest, was probably the Ash Twins and Ember Twin. But a lot of the stuff that's cool there is really hidden. I wound up really, really liking Giant's Deep. There's just a lot going on Giant's Deep. And it is very cool to explore. It's got my favorite of the Lost Astronauts. There's a lot of fun to be had on that.
Yeah. Oh, I like that dude a lot. And I also really like that he teaches you the meditate option, which adds an option to your menu that basically lets you reboot a run at any point. I kind of wish that had just been there from the beginning, but it was really nice that that option was there afterwards. For me, probably my favorite thing to discover was the quantum moon, because it took so long to figure out. So
what a great puzzle the quantum moon is.
Such a cool puzzle.
Let me talk about that for just a minute. Okay, so the Nomai landed on a couple of different places in the solar system, and so if you're trying to dig up any information from them, you're pretty quickly going to find out that both of their civilizations both noticed this moon, this wandering moon, that sometimes appears above some of the planets and sometimes doesn't. And you start reading from their observation of this moon that it's sensitive to whether or not it's being observed in like it's a like in quantum mechanics, the idea of something being observed or not. So you can find this moon just by like looking around the solar system, and it might be orbiting any one of the different planets. And then you can start trying to fly towards it. And as you start flying in, you start going through some clouds, and actually you lose sight of the planet as you get into the clouds, and suddenly the moon is gone. It's gone somewhere else.
So cool.
And so the Nomai found this to be incredibly interesting, and they built what almost seemed like a small religion around it. They're very scientifically oriented, but they created like a pilgrimage system that was entirely about exploring and learning the secrets of the quantum moon. And so you're able to follow their pathway to explore the quantum moon. And the things that you have to learn to do that, I don't want to spoil, but they're really interesting, and they'll take you to some of the coolest places in the game. I am really a huge fan of video games that play with your perception. This works really well in like horror games where like the monster's behind you, or you're in we played Control recently, and there's places in that where you turn around and you look back and the room has changed in some way, right? I love that kind of thing because it's something you really only can experience in a video game, because it's not really possible, but it's also something that's really super fun, like it really, it leads to some, and here it leads to really cool puzzle elements. In horror games, it's really effective for horror, and here it's really effective for puzzles. How did you solve the secret of the quantum moon, Reagan? Or we don't want to talk about solutions.
Well, I think we're in our very post spoiler section. We can probably talk somewhat about it. So the first hint is that even on your home planet, there's a place where you can find these rocks that move if you're not looking at them. There's one of them in the Harthian sort of museum where they have all the details about the solar system that they've brought back from the other planets. And they have one of these rocks that when you're not looking at it, it moves. What's the deal with that? It obviously sort of ties into the idea of like, in quantum theory about like quantum particles potentially being in multiple states and then collapsing into a single state when they're observed, which is this very weird idea that doesn't make sense at a macro scale. But in this universe, there are objects that operate under sort of quantum mechanics when at macro scale. And it took me a while to figure this out. I figured out like you do need those sort of 3 different secrets in order to get everything that you need to know for the quantum moon. But I found out enough to land there pretty quickly. I thought to myself, okay, this thing keeps moving whenever I look away from it. I spent a long time trying to do things like there's a place where there's a locator that will point to where the quantum moon is. And it's basically just sort of like a big circle on the ground with a bunch of symbols for all the other planets. And there's a little thing that says like, here's the quantum moon. It's on that planet. And I spent a long time trying to figure out how to just fly there from that. But the problem, of course, is that if you get into your spaceship, you almost always lose sight of the moon when you do that. And then it will have moved by the time you are in your spaceship ready to fly towards it. So I spent a long time trying to figure that out. And in my frustration, I thought, what if I just shot a thing at the quantum moon, one of the little scouts? And I figured out kind of by accident that if I had a picture of the quantum moon on screen, that was just as good as looking at the quantum moon. It wouldn't disappear. So that allowed me to actually land on the quantum moon, but it didn't let me do anything while I was there. I just landed on this horrible quantum wasteland, and it took a while to figure out that the terrain of the quantum moon changes depending on what planet it's orbiting, which is very confusing. And then all the objects keep moving around when you're not looking at them, which is also wild. So I just kept hunting for more information about the quantum moon as I explored the rest of the game. And every now and then I'd find a little more information, and that would let me unlock something else cool. And I will say that the payoff, once you finally figure out all the secrets of the quantum moon, is enormous. It's one of the coolest, it's probably second to the ending. It's probably the coolest payoff for something that you find in the game.
Definitely.
I don't know if there's anything like all the planets are cool, all the puzzles are cool. Do we want to talk about like the Nomai and their story?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is probably the key mystery, like the biggest mystery in the game is learning this story. So if you're still here and you want to play the game, you should disconnect. But yeah, the thing that I really liked about the Nomai is how much personality you get through their journey. Like they're out there. There's this whole Nomai civilization out there in the galaxy, and in different tribes living in these different big spaceships. And this one tribe of the Nomai detect a signal that is of intense scientific interest to them, because the signal appears to be coming from this solar system, and it appears to be older than the universe itself, as impossible as that might seem. And they call this the Eye of the Universe. And so they want to follow the signal as quickly as possible. They don't tell anyone where they're going. They fire up their ship and they teleport. They launch themselves to this solar system, and then they immediately crash into the Bramble, wrecking their vessel and destroying it.
By the way, before we get past all of that, I really liked the ideas about like Nomai civilization across the universe, like that you discover. The Nomai are not just these Nomai. The Nomai are a species of sort of collectives, each of which has its own vessel, and all of them kind of go around the universe collecting scientific knowledge. And then every few years, they have a festival where they come together as a species in one place and share everything that they've learned. And this idea of this like, spacefaring science race going around in little like planet ships, I just thought that was such a charming idea. And then the idea that this one troop of Nomai is like castaways in this tiny solar system, and and even though they are trapped there, they're spending most of their scientific efforts not on rebuilding their ship to escape this tiny solar system, but instead on continuing to try to solve the scientific mystery that brought them there, is so nice. I really like these people, these dead goat men. I just think they're so great.
Yes, the writing for them is actually really good. They have a lot of personality, and they have, so it's really sad that their ultimate fate. But so they've come here and they launch these 3 escape pods from their vessel. One of them doesn't make it out of the Dark Bramble, and one of them makes it to the Ember Twin, and the other makes it to Brittle Hollow. And both of those places kind of flourish for a while, I think for like a generation, as these little disconnected independent colonies. And each of them discover the quantum moon. But when they finally reunite, they're able to finally fully discover the secrets of the quantum moon. Then all the while, they're still trying to discover, rebuild their civilization a little bit, and discover the secret of the origin of this this signal that they see as older than the universe, and they're trying to reach it. And the problem is that, like the quantum moon, the origin of the signal is moving in a quantum fashion. It's hard to find, and they can't truly observe it, so they can't really locate it. And they come up with a plan to basically launch now this is the Ash Twin project, and this is the part where it gets a little bit hard to explain. Yeah,
I still have a couple of questions here about some of the details here.
Okay, so they created this Ash Twin project that was going to allow them to observe or to kind of find the source of this signal across a lot of different possible locations, or basically infinitely and in a quantum fashion fire off these probes in different places and directions, I think is the idea.
Oh, wait, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, so they can't they have to observe the eye of the universe in order to stop it from moving. And so, but they can't observe the entirety of the solar system at once. So the Ash Twin project.
I think that's the idea.
I think that makes sense.
I think that's why they're firing.
That explains a small question that I had about this.
So they decide to create this time loop, this like infinite time loop, in order to kind of infinitely and randomly fire off these probes in every direction at once, right? And so they create this machine that is going to store knowledge across these time loops, and B, retrieve data from this probe that's going to be fired off. And that is the Ash Twin project.
Yeah, the key to this is that they need to be able, they're essentially going to need to be able to try to send out these probes, potentially an infinite number of times in every direction in order to locate this thing. But they can't just do them one after another. They'd be waiting forever, and they can't. And as soon as they find it, it would have moved.
And the time loop itself needs an incredible amount of energy. Looping time in this way, which they discover kind of through their black holes, requires the energy of an exploding sun.
Right. It's not quite a time loop exactly. What requires the energy is sending information back in time, 22 minutes. And the information that's being sent back in time is the knowledge stored within those statues. So each of the nomai gets paired up with a statue that is constantly recording their thoughts. And then at any point, those statues can, with this incredible power of an exploding sun, send that information back in time 22 minutes. And their thought was, well, if we need all this power to explode the sun, we can still just, we can just explode the sun and then go back in time 22 minutes before we did that, send off a new probe, wait 22 minutes, explode the sun again, and continue to explode the sun again and again until they find the thing, at which point they can then flee the solar system. But their plan to explode the sun, which was the key part of the plan, didn't work. Everything else was set up. The probe launcher was set up. The whole works was ready to go, but ultimately they were unable to explode the sun. So the Ash Twin project was a failure, and they were never able to discover the location of the eye of the universe.
And just as they were thinking, well, maybe we'll try and figure out a different way, a comet swings through their solar system. This is the comet called the Interloper, and somewhere in it there is some kind of container full of this unstable and deadly matter called ghost matter that you can still find in various. It's invisible, but it can kill you if you touch it, and it explodes this deadly substance across the entire solar system, killing every life form that's on the surface, leaving the Harthians, who are at this point fish living in caves, deep underground. So the Harthians are the only thing in the solar system that survives. The Nomai are completely eradicated and destroyed, but all of their technology is left exactly as it was. For eons, while the fish people evolve into four-eyed space explorers.
Yes, and that's where you come in. And the reason that you are in this time loop is that all of this technology for the Nomai to intentionally create essentially a time loop was there waiting for a power source, the power source of an exploding sun. Well, turns out today's the day your sun is exploding for completely natural reasons, which was a sad surprise to me because I thought I was going to be able to stop the sun from exploding. No, you can't. And so the sun explodes for its completely natural reasons.
You can't explode the sun on purpose, and you can't stop it from exploding on its own.
Yep. And that's why you're stuck in this time loop. You have the final 22 minutes of your solar system's existence to...
This is one of the last things that I discovered, by the way, which is part of, we're getting kind of into the ending.
Yeah.
The stuff that you learn around the ending.
The ending is, I thought, really beautiful and sad and also just really cool. So yeah, you're doing the last thing that anyone in your solar system will ever do, right? Because this is it. This is the end. There's nothing that can stop the sun from exploding. But what you can do is carry out the sort of last wish of the Nomai people and find the eye of the universe. And what I think is really interesting about the idea of the eye of the universe is that it is this massive planet that is left over, presumably, from the last universe or something like that, but it operates on, like the quantum moon, which is a fragment of the eye of the universe, it operates on a quantum basis, which means that it just needs a conscious observer to, like, it has no quantum shape, right? It is formless in the way that quantum things are until it's observed, in which case it falls into order. And so you'll be the first conscious being to observe the moon, or excuse me, the eye of the universe. And that is, I guess, sort of meant as sort of like, well, this is how the universe ends and is reborn, is that like this is, so finding the eye of the universe was really, really interesting. You have to find the vessel that the Nomai came to the solar system in. You then have to find a core to power it. You have to go get that core, which comes from the Ash Twin project where your memories are being stored. And that means...
Oh, you also need to get the coordinates that were discovered by the probe,
right,
from the probe tracking module, which has tumbled into the core of Giant's Deep, which is its own enormous challenge.
Yeah. So in order to finish this whole, I guess, cycle and end the game, you have to have discovered a lot of very important secrets. Now, importantly, you don't have to have discovered everything in the game, which is an interesting way that this works. Is like, there's no, you don't have to like reach 100% completion on like knowing all of the things or whatever. But
yeah, in particular, you have to have found the advanced warp core, which is in the high energy lab, I believe, of the Ash Twin project. You have to discover the vessel in the Dark Bramble, and you have to have the coordinates from the probe tracking module.
Yeah, and I would say it's not in the high energy lab. The advanced warp core is powering the sort of masks or whatever in the Ash Twin core. So it's not in the high energy lab.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to get the advanced warp core from the Ash Twin project and take it to the vessel. And then you can, in the vessel, you can input the coordinates that you found for the Eye of the Universe. Once there, the supernova that consumes the solar system will not reach you. But once there, you enter one of the most interesting sequences I've ever played in a game, especially the ending of a game. You're able to kind of exit the vessel into this kind of dark, crackling with energy, like purple space. And you kind of go down into this crater, which was the origin point of the quantum moon. It's like it split off from the eye of the universe, and then you fall down through this infinite vortex where you see some really incredible sights of like you're falling through a giant empty space swirling with energy and storms of I don't know what purple stuff. Until you finally reach the ground. And at that point, you're basically in doing these various tasks that kind of take you back through some of the things you've learned in the game. They're kind of a lot of them related to the quantum rules that you learned around the mystery of the quantum moon, which we haven't really even talked about, but I'll leave that for another time, I guess, or for you guys to play
I guess
out.
What's important about this is that like you're so it's very 2001: A Space Odyssey, at least as far as I'm concerned. This final ending,
yes, it is,
because it's like the idea is that like you're seeing these surreal things, but there's a reason for this sort of surreal environment, which is that like you're now in a place where with like this sort of infinite quantum possibility, and by observing it, you're somehow like reshaping the space around you to sort of match your wants or expectations or what have you, and you can see that this is the end of the universe, that the entire universe is coming to an end. The Nomai had been talking in some of their writings about how the lights were going out in the universe, stars were going out all around them, and things were winding down.
That's something I once they mention that, you could look up in any of the night sky and see that various stars all around the universe in the night sky are exploding and supernovaing. So it's not just your sun; it's most of the universe. Like this is the end of the actual universe.
Yeah, and so this is happening around the entire universe, but being that you now sort of are in the driver's seat of the like origin point of the universe, you are the one to set the new universe in motion. And you do that by gathering around a campfire with your friends.
Yeah, get the band back together. And so those various different astronauts that you went around and met, like Feldspar and Rybeck and Gabbro and Esker and Chert. And then if you've met her on the quantum moon, Solanium, the last living Nomai, is there as well. And once you've kind of gathered all of these people that you've met together, this sort of blue ball that looks like the quantum moon, but is kind of flashing with different imagery. Again, this is all very surreal and really cool. Kind of appears in the smoke of the campfire, and then you kind of launch yourself into it. And when you do that, that's when it rolls the credits. And there's a little picture at the end of the credits where you see the start of new life in, I guess, the new universe. And there's like some bug people that are pulling themselves up to look at the stars. And I don't know, it was really cool. It was the thing that it manages really well is it really lets you spend time in this ending. Like it's not just like over quickly.
It's the first time where there's
a
no
long
countdown
sequence.
clock, essentially.
Yes, and it takes you back through a lot of the things that you learned. Like, for example, it takes you back through like another version of the museum and one part of it where you learn and reminds you of, okay, these are the things that you learned. And it's almost like a little eulogy for your little universe that you're in. And it's a little saying goodbye to all of these things. And it's sad because you've realized like you can't actually save the universe, which for most of the game, or you think, okay, I'm going to try and save my planet. I'm going to try and save my solar system by stopping the end, stopping this explosion. And then it's this process of coming to terms with like mortality and the fact that you can't, and the fact that everything ends.
Yeah.
And that's what really made it wonderful for me, because it's very poignant, and it also plays out in such a way that it takes you back and reminds you of everything you liked about this little solar system and world that you've explored. And so I thought it was really beautiful and unique, and I really hope a lot of the people out there get a chance to actually complete this game.
It is a really poignant ending, and I found myself kind of like misting up at the end, because it's this little, astronaut that could, from a tiny planet that had no chance. These things crawled out of the primordial goo just in time to see the universe end. Right? What a tragedy that these beautiful people never had a chance, and yet they get to be there for the beginning of the next, the next cycle. And I just thought it was like a really beautiful ending. And I can't recommend it enough. I hope, hopefully if you're listening at this point, you're already on my side here. But this sprung to my Game of the Year list so fast. Like I don't know where this is going to be on my 2019 Game of the Year list, but it's certainly going to be up there. So anyway, wow. Any last thoughts on this game?
Not really, only that I think I hope you listeners understand why we made a little bit of extra time for it. We get to decide what shows, what games appear on our show. There are no podcast police. We will often say that we are looking for games that respect your time, and often that means we are, and often for us, that means we're looking for games that are under 10 hours, but it doesn't always mean that. And this is a little bit of a bend. If we, in the future, want to cover more long games, we'd love to know how you feel about that. This is not long by most people's definition, being about 15 hours, but it's not quite up to our standard. I definitely felt like it respected my time. So if you guys have opinions on the sort of thing that you would like to hear us cover, is there a game that is a little longer than our normal requirements that we're missing out on? Is there an experience that we really should spend that extra 5 to 10 hours with? Let us know, ideally on our Discord, or you can find us on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting very close to the end of the year here. We're going to be putting together our Game of the Year lists. We've only played what we've played. I am looking forward to hearing what everybody puts on their Game of the Year lists. I want to hear what yours are. So if you have short game or long Game of the Year lists, share them with us. And, I might scramble and play 1 or 2 extra games before the end of the year. But even if I don't, I like to spend the first couple of months of the new year catching up on everything that everybody played in the previous year that I didn't get a chance to. So let us know what's on your lists. And thank you for listening to The Short Game in 2019.